there, welcome to Perspective Unleashed. Now, this is a show where we bring you stories, facts, and insight to give you a wholesome perspective from the Word of God and the world around you. My name is Buki Bash, and with me is my co-host,
Shay Adenawa. Today on Perspective Unleashed, we are going to be talking about education.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such an important topic because every day we learn, every day we're
Yes.
processing information, we're learning new things about our world, about ourselves, and we're applying it in the world. So that's why it's important to talk about education. And we're going to take you back to the past, look at what it is today, and then now talk about the future. What's God designed for education?
Exactly.
How are we supposed to apply? What are the flaws of the current educational system, and how can we improve it and make it better? So I mentioned just briefly that education is, learning and receiving information. It's not just learning, it's giving and receiving information in a systemic manner. And oftentimes it's done formally or informally. So it could be done in a school, which is formal. So K-12 schools, tertiary institutions, other types of institutions that we have, and then informally, either be taught by a parent, be taught by a guardian, or be taught in like a vocational center that's not necessarily an academic institution. But then education is not a new term. It might seem like schools and the concept of learning is relatively new, but it's not. It began from the first day of creation.
Yeah.
We were given instructions. So we already said it's when you're giving systemic instruction. So
Yeah.
we're given instruction to go have dominion over the earth, subdue it, recreate, and all of that in Genesis, right? So that was the beginning of education. And when education started, it was more of imitation, observance, listening. So you would hear like folklore stories were told to children, and those stories would be carried on from generation to generation. And you can see it replete in the Bible how the children of Israel would always make reference to stories that were told by their fathers of their experience maybe in Egypt or when they were maybe in captivity in Babylon, all of those places, right? So that was how education started, just imitation and story. And then moving on to the more formal settings, right? The Renaissance period, when maybe even before the Renaissance, we had the Mesopotamians, the Chinese, the Indians, the Egyptians, hieroglyphics, all of those things. Then moving to written education, then the religious bodies took over education.
Yeah.
I think that's the Renaissance era. So with the Catholic Church handling most of the education, then we had the Industrial Revolution, and then we now have what we have as modern day education.
Today.
And what we understand, and what most of us in our generation is the one funded by the Rockefellers, by the General Education Board. That's what we know. So that's just like a very compressed timeline of education.
Really compressed. You really tried by compressing that. But then what I hear you say now, aside from talking about the history inside, is that it's fundamentally about information, how we receive, process, and apply information to life, irrespective of the process, whether it's formal or it's informal. Now, oftentimes people mix the word education and literacy, and they're not the same.
They're not the same.
Literacy speaks to more about understanding writings, reading and writing, your ability to read and write. Because there was some parts of education where you needed to understand writings, and that would speak to literacy, you being able to read and being able to write. But a person can be literate and really uneducated. But when you're literate, you should be educated. But that's actually the essence of you being literate. Because if you look at the formal education system, it begins with teaching you how to be literate, how to know, okay, this is letter A, this is letter B, and then you're able to read and write and then comprehend. Then before you can now start receiving a higher level of education. So from my perspective, education is fundamentally information. Information that begins with some sort of literacy. And then you can even be educated without even not necessarily being literate, because the literacy actually helps the education. It's a channel that fosters education. Because you have some people that are educated in certain things, they are informal, but they understand it, they have the knowledge and they can apply it.
Exactly.
And so your education is actually supposed to give you access to knowledge so that you can apply it in a way that it improves your life, it improves your communication, it improves, the quality of the life that you're living, and you are able to solve problems. And education is a very, very critical part of life. But what do we have today? where are we coming from and where we are going to is what we're looking at. So if we dwell a little bit on where we are coming from, looking at the history, you've said a whole lot about the history. You talked about, the different eras, in a crash 1 minute or 2 minutes that you just did. But you mentioned something quite interesting about the Rockefeller Foundation sponsoring the education that we know today because of after the Second World War, I believe.
Yes, after the Second World War.
Yes, and that because they needed a certain kind of people to, have laborers for the factories.
Yeah, let me
and so
speak about
there were
that.
systems.
Let me speak
Yes,
about that
tell
a
us
little bit.
more about that.
So, in around like the 1960s, let's just say 1900s. Let's keep it open.
Open, yeah.
Yeah. So, just after the Second World War, the
Yeah.
Rockefeller Foundation funded the General Education Board, which is what a lot of the world has mirrored now, right? So there were different forms of learning, and it was very different. So in Northern Africa, like Egypt, they had a different way they would educate people. And, that was where universities started from, right? In Ethiopia, they had that. In Asia, they had, their own kinds of education. That, like you said, and I love that you mentioned this literacy part, because you can be literate in maybe English language, but then highly uneducated, right? So they funded this, and the reason why they needed to fund the education board is because they needed to bring up people that would be able to work in the factories and in what we now know as like a 9-to-5 or a white-collar job post-World War era, right? So they needed these people to be able to adhere to instructions, take instructions in a certain way, adhere to strict times. So the way it is, like maybe in like a prison, for example, and I like to compare it because even if you look at it architecturally, most prisons and schools kind of have a similar features. So, get comfortable with wearing uniforms, get comfortable with not asking questions, put certain people in places of authority, which is kind of arbitrary, because like how much power does a teacher have? Because now we're having problems with where teachers are enabling children to change their agendas. Teachers shouldn't have that much power. Teachers are questioning parents on their parenting skills, right? So again, arbitrary authority, because it's not limited. It doesn't tell you where your power should start and end as an educator. And like telling you what to do as a child. This is the future you should have. This is the mindset you should have. So you've put in place these pillars of authority in the school setting because they needed people to be ready for the workforce. Again, someone is benefiting economically from education being the way that it is today. And that's why they had to fund it, because they're the ones enjoying the benefits of the workforce that has come in now, not asking questions. You don't have independent thinkers anymore, people that are able to question and probe things and ask, why is this? Why is it the way that it is? This is inconsistent with what my upbringing, because in as much as your upbringing, which is informal, is not written down in a book, it's proven to have worked. And we see that in the Bible. There's so many actions and acts. And, if you go through Deuteronomy, you go to Leviticus, you can see so many things that even now we're sort of reversing back to those things because we went away from it for so long. How to eat, the choices of food, how to sleep, how to relate with your neighbor, your friends, your family. Those were deemed as informal education because it wasn't done in a school. But in a structured. I mean, but I would come against that and say no, it's very structured, because if you look at the way it was done in the Bible, well documented, that is structured to me. It's documented, it's done chronologically. You can make references. Yes, there's cross-referencing. So I think it's structured. But again, this idea of structure was another, like the way structure should look like.
Speaking of structure, the question is the structure that we have now. Who created it? Exactly. Where is it coming from? And why is it what we adhere to now? And then another thing is, where should really the source of education, where should it be from? We need to look at the source, whether it's in the past, now, or in the future. What are we learning? What we're learning, is it true? Because the essence of acquiring education is to have knowledge. And I remember what Pastor Chris said during one of the Your Love World specials. He said that knowledge cannot be a lie. It has to be true to be knowledge. And so if you're going to get an education so that you can acquire knowledge, whatever it is that you're learning has to be true. If what you're learning is a lie, you have no knowledge. And so you have not really been educated.